What's up, electronic dance music producers? Have you ever wondered why you spend so much time on your builds, but your drops still sound flat? Your track builds, and then when the drop comes in, it doesn't have the energy that you wanted to give out in your track. So let's jump into some of my tracks and give you some examples here of the thinking and the thought process and what is it that I look at, what's more important, what's the most important thing to apply in your music when you're building a build, when you're layering a build, to be able to make the right decisions and to know exactly what builds contrast, builds tension, to be able to have drops that come in and it feels good with the emotion of the track. So let's jump into it. So I have 4 tracks here. They all offer some different way of thinking, different way of approaching when it comes to the build. So let's play a bit of the end of the first drop, leading to the break, the build, and the drop, just so we get a sense of what's happening in terms of energy. So we get into the track. Let's go.
Somewhere between the fire, I'm still alive in here. And how are you? Is there somewhere only we know? Somewhere only we know. Somewhere between the fire, I'm still alive. Somewhere only we know. Somewhere only we know.
So this track is not fully mixed and that doesn't really matter, but when you're listening to the track and going through the emotion of the vocals and how the leads come in, a build is only as important as what's happening before and after, right? So the most important thing is how is energy moving through the track? How is the emotion moving through the track? Not every build needs to be the same. Not every build needs to have the same levels of stacking of snares and risers. That is the easy way of doing things, where you just put snare rolls and risers and that checklist of things that you go through, but we often forget the emotion behind it. So for example, for this track, you'll see a lot of my builds are non-traditional, but they work. So the vocal comes in and out, it's interplaying with the lead, it's very melodic and ethereal as it progresses. The kick comes in just to steady the beat a bit, and then at the end, we see some elements open up, and then when the drop comes in, it's powerful, right? How are we doing that? We're making sure there's a dynamic change in terms of every single frequency band that we could think of. For example, if I were to put an EQ here, just so we could visualize, or we could put a spectrum analyzer, not an EQ necessarily. Let's go, here we go, spectrum, yeah. Let's plug this here, and let's see what's happening in terms of visuals from this section of the track entering to the drop. So a lot of the drum elements are missing. The kick is stopping here. So we're gaining a bit of the low end back and it fully comes in. If we were to split this spectrum in like 3 main parts, so anything like around the 100 mark and below, the sub range, 100 to like a 1000, kind of the low mids, and let's look at the high mids and the highs together. For each of these regions, we need moments where there's contrast, meaning what happens here versus what happens here. There's elements being removed or added from one section to the next. That's what keeps the dynamic flow of the track moving forward. And sometimes it's as simple as removing an instrument creates an emptiness, and that emptiness is powerful enough in a sense of like creates anticipation and tension. Remember, not every build is about stacking stuff over and over again until you just build up and create this chaos. Those type of builds do make sense. What I'm also doing here is I'm using a type of effect which kind of smears and stretches the sound. I'm actually applying it on the master channel. The effect is less important in terms of how to do it. It really isn't. What's important is like what's happening. If we listen to it, from the steadiness, we go to a bit of a disjointed rhythm. We're getting some elements from the lows disappear, and then everything's coming back in. The only element here that is opening up, if you listen to it, is I believe it's the bass line that's opening up to create a bit of brightness, to create a bit of movement in the story, in the section. But it's the only thing that has brightness. The rest of the track is quite muffled, doesn't have every single element needed, and then everything opens up on the drop. We're delivering everything on the drop. So let's listen again to how the instrument that's opening up, which is the bass. We're getting a bit of the high end of it, but everything else is muffled. And then also listen to the fact that that effect that creates a rhythmic kind of dissonance here, which makes it in a way where like it peaks the tension and we feel like a drop's gonna come. So that effect is like it peaks the intensity and then it drops. And also the instrument that was opening up was the pluck. It was not the bass line. Sorry about that. But you see how the pluck is muffled and it slowly opens up. So this is an example of how a build could sound good. So let's kind of review a couple of points here. The low end, mid range, and the high range. What instruments do we remove to be able to bring back in each of these ranges? If you think about it that way, it gives you always something to test out and try until you get that good flow and energy. Number two, I'm keeping things muffled. I'm opening up one certain element to create movement and intensity. There's a specific rhythmic element I'm adding at the end here, which is stretching the sound a little bit and creating a bit of a, ooh, something's happening, boom, the drop comes in. So let's look at the second example. So every example here has something different to offer in terms of thinking and applying. So this song is it's unique in its sense in terms of structure and also the rhythmic aspect of it. At first I was saying, should I include this or not? But I want to include this because there's a lot to learn from this experience. So there's two kind of builds here. And these builds are subtle. They're not massive explosions or anything, right? So here we're using a lot of reverb to push the sound back, and then we're landing into the initial groove that happens at the beginning of the track. You haven't heard it, but it ties the story together. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating massive contrast. And it's not really a full drop. It's kind of like an intermittent drop that ends up getting into the next section, which also happens to be another build, right? So it's a bit more complex, this one. But if we listen to what's happening in terms of forward momentum, because that's what matters in a build, forward momentum, is that we're kind of pushing the track back, adding a lot of effect. We're pushing it with reverb, with delay, some weird automations on the delay to create a sense of like what is about to happen, the tension. And then the section we come in here, right, even though it's not a drop, it's kind of still part of the build, creates, there's a contrast between the opening of the sound and the groove of the bass and the sonic design of it. Let's hear it one more time. And then this section comes back in, and then it kind of builds back up here. This is a simple one right here. What we're doing is there's no kick playing. What's happening to the low end? Let's check out the low end in between the two sections. So there's a pause. We're stretching the delay and the reverb here to create this weird sense of like instability. We create instability because the drop brings back stability. That contrast is what amplifies the emotion of the build, right? So I know for some of you, this might feel a bit complex. If you're just like, hey, Vardy, just show me how to build a normal build. It's like, there is no such thing as a normal build. And if you just want to do what everyone else is doing, it's just going to sound, it's not going to communicate the message that you want to communicate. So in any moment of the track, when you're listening to it, ask yourself, how can I create contrast from one section to the next? This is not only a lesson for you to apply in builds, it's a lesson for you in terms of storytelling across all aspects of the track. Right? So I'm giving you really different examples here just to show you that the thinking carries through in all examples. If your thought process of building a build is just layering snare rolls and reverse risers and all the typical stuff, you can. The same questions still apply. How do we create contrast when we look at the three bands in our EQ spectrum? So let's check out this track right here. So I wanted to pick this example. By the way, this is an older version of the track. The latest version of the track was like version 7. A lot of things were done. This is like really mixed. It's mock mastered, but the reason why I wanted to take this version here, even though it's not an explosive landing on the drop, what this does is it carries the emotion forward. And the kick comes in here, right? Again, I'm not using any type of risers or reverse risers or snare builds or anything of that sort, which I could have per se, but I decided not to use it because it tells a story in a better way, I believe. This entire section which is considered to be the lead, is an interplay between the lead and the vocals. And when the lead comes in, tells you a bit of a story, and then the vocals tells a story, and then the lead tells a story, and the vocal story. And then once we get to the end, it's a simple tension that I've created, because I could have easily gone from this section to a regular build, but I decided to actually keep it very short. And what I'm doing here, let's listen to it one more time and try to pay attention to what's happening in each frequency range. So what's important here is the low end is dropping. We're creating more of an aggressive movement with automation where the pads are opening up. Listen to the pads one more time. And then there's a pause happening here with a lot of the instruments, and we're hearing the vocals say the last sentence. And everything comes back in afterwards. The drums come back in. One of the best things that you can do in a build is start shaving things off slowly. So the story evolves and evolves and evolves. It's kind of an anti-climactic build. Slowly you're shaving things off to a point where things calm down, and then boom, you bring it back in. And you don't need to do anything magical to bring it back in. You're just bringing all the instruments that you took slowly back out. You're bringing it back in. So these are the 3 tracks. I have a 4th track here, which I'm not going to use in this case. These are the 3 tracks I wanted to kind of shed light on. And again, I don't want to use the typical riser. There's a lot of videos on YouTube that show you how to do that. What I wanted to show you here is that a song, especially with that has emotion, has meaning, how we're telling a story and how every section matters, and how we could build contrast from one section to the next in a build to the drop to move the story forward for it to feel solid and stable. And the anti-climactic approach of like removing some layers slowly to then bring everything back in, creating the tension through opening up filters, whether it's on the bass, on the plucks, or the pads, thinking your frequency range in terms of the 3 sections and asking yourself what's happening in each of these sections before the drop and after the drop. I need to create contrast, meaning if I remove the kick, I'll bring the kick back. If I remove the low end, the bass, I'll bring the bass back. If there is instruments in the mid-range that have a lot of energy, I could pull back to be able to bring it back in, and same for the highs as well. So hope this was helpful. This has a lot of mindset in the DAW, which we call in our program, type of thinking. How are we processing information? How can we apply this to our own music? Hope this is helpful. If you want to jump in and have a deeper conversation about your music, where you are in your journey, you could always book in a call with us. It's a free call, of course, for us to get a sense of who you are, where you are, and how we could actually help you think better and become a better producer all around. We could chat. Hope this is helpful. Love you guys. See ya.